So I'm going to start this sermon with a story. So there's a married man, right, and he's got a very critical heart problem. Now they're at the doctor's surgery, and the doctor calls the wife and he says, for the husband, could you please wait outside? I just need to talk to your wife for a bit. And then when the wife's alone with the doctor, he says, I'm sorry to say, your husband is in really, really bad shape. He will surely die unless you do 3 things. He says you need to cook healthy food for him. You need to rub his neck and shoulders and help him relax. And be intimate with him at least 3 times a week. So when she came out of the doctor's office, the husband was just eager, like, honey, what did the doctor tell you? She says, I'm sorry, honey, the doctor says you're going to die. So today's sermon, it's about marriage. Marriage is an integral part. It's like one of the first, I think it is the first covenant that God made with man. God made with man. Adam and Eve, right? God made with man. Very important to understand. God brings 2 people together. It's a very integral part of society. The thing that the devil attacks, first and foremost, is the covenant of marriage, because it's the first covenant he made, that God made. It's the first one he attacks, because the devil knows, right? The breakup of marriage ruins society. And when society is ruined as a whole, when a state or a city doesn't live in a godly manner, what happens? All sorts of unethical, ungodly things happen. Crime goes up. That's a natural consequence. There's no compassion for the needy, so governments don't even care what happens, right? And there's corruption that rises. There's many, many ungodly things when society breaks down, and the key is marriage. That's the key. With that understanding, last month I had my wedding anniversary with Lana. Like, we went away for the weekend. It was on Saturday, the 13th of July. My birthday's on the 11th of July, so it's very close. Every time we, have my birthday, I know my wedding anniversary. I never forget. God loves me that much. I'm in the 11th of July, she's the 11th of May. Like 2 months before, like, I can't get it wrong. Thanks. So we went away for that weekend, short holiday, but it marked our 22-year wedding anniversary. Lana and I were married in 2002. Imagine 22 years. I know there's others that, married longer, right? And there's others that are married shorter. But I'm just trying to get you to picture what 22 years means. I stuck it into a marriage calculator on Google. It said 22 years, right? Then it said in months it was 264 months. In weeks, 1,151 weeks. In days, over 8,000 days. 8,000 days. In hours, 193 hours. 193,000 hours. In minutes, over 11.5 million minutes. I was thinking if I had $1 for every one of those minutes, I'd be a millionaire. So today, we're going to discuss marriage. It's a big topic. First and foremost, I'll say I'm not an expert in it. I don't think anyone's an expert in it, right? But 22 years, I think I've got a little bit of a gist as to what it's about. And others too, of course. Marriage is a continual thing, because you're not, 2 rocks aren't marrying. And even over time, over thousands of years, rocks change. Humans change. And as a married couple, we just need to adapt to those changes. So we do change over time. But because I'm primarily referencing the Bible and verses that Jesus wrote, and Paul and things like that in Ephesians and Matthew, especially, I concentrate on Matthew a lot. It's basically God's word. It's God's thoughts on marriage, not my thoughts. So I'm just going to interpret what Jesus says. And even though there's singles out here, I'm sure, even though this is a message about marriage, I also cover topics like choosing the right person and building your foundation and all of these things. So even for the singles out there, it's important to understand these concepts because it allows them to see, who should I choose? What rock am I building on? And that's the first principle I'm leading into. Build your marriage on the rock, have a strong foundation. Very important. And I'm going to start with another one. See, there's a CEO, large insurance company. He and his wife, they're driving down the interstate, and already he sees while he's driving, he's going to start running out of gas. And because he's on the main thing, there's 100 kilometres between petrol stops, he's not going to make it. So he says, I'll quickly take the next exit. He takes the next exit into a little town, and he finds one completely run down petrol station with only one attendant. So he gets out of his car. He says, I'm a little bit, I need to stretch my legs. I'm, going to go look at your snack thing. Could you please just, fill the gas into my car, check the oil and things like that. So as he walks off, he's wandering around the snack shelf. He looks back and he finds his wife and this attendant talking, continually talking. While he's doing his stuff, they're talking. Oh, this is a bit odd, right? So he goes out there, walks back to the car. And then as he walks back, everything's finished. So he starts to buckle up and ready. And she's already waving, he's waving. And she says, it was great talking with you. And he said, oh, okay, while he's driving off, he said, do you know that guy? She says, yeah. Actually was in high school with him and I dated him for a year. He went, oh, glad I came along, aren't you? Because now, instead of marrying that gas station attendant, you've married a CEO of a large insurance company. She said, no, dear. If I married him, he would be the CEO and you'd be the one pumping gas. It's choosing the right partner. That's what that speaks to. Building a strong foundation includes choosing the right partner. If we go to Matthew 19, verses 4 to 6, please. This is what Jesus said in Matthew. And he answered and said, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. If we go to Matthew 7, verse 24, please. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. So, in these verses that I'm talking about, this is Jesus' part where he does the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes. It's the most well-known verses of, when Jesus spoke. One of the most well-known verses. Many chapters. There's three main chapters for it. So, in Matthew 5, he covers, in one chapter, he covers anger. He covers lust, he covers integrity, he covers vengeance, he covers forgiveness, personal relationships, adultery, and divorce. And in Matthew 6, Jesus covers giving, fasting, and anxiety. And in Matthew 7, all of this on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus covers judging others, prayer, the narrow and the wide gates, a tree and its fruits. So in verse 24 of that chapter, he then proceeds on two foundations. That's what I'm going to talk about. The wise man that built the house on the rock, and the foolish man who built the house on the sand. It doesn't say the wise man. He says the foolish man that built the house on the sand. A house here can be considered our lives and can also be considered our marriages. What does he say about our marriages when you replace that? He says, marriages that are built on sand will fail. In Matthew 7, verse 27, please. I always read from the NASB. I usually read from the NASB 1995. Jesus said, the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and slammed against that house, which is slammed against your marriage. And it fell, and great was that fall. Then he says, a marriage built on rock will stand. See, when we're doing our vows, this is what we normally hear, even when we're watching movies and things. It says, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. In other words, isn't that what Jesus was saying? When we turn to verse 25. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, which is that marriage, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. So the question is, what does it mean to build a marriage on the rock? Simply put, it's building your marriage, building our marriages in obedience to Jesus. It means putting God in the center of our marriages. Not you, not me, God in the center of our marriages. It means in every way in our marriages to actively seek Him, seek His guidance, seek His wisdom and His grace. And it means inviting His presence into our marriages. When we do that, it allows Him to lead and guide in every aspect of our marriage. If you're closing the door on God in your marriage and it's just between you two, you've got manly thoughts, humanly thoughts I should say, humanly thoughts that bump into each other. When you let God be that third person, then He can guide in every aspect. To keep His words in the center of our daily lives, to have that love for one another, to be the center of our romance, and even when we have conflict, be the center of that conflict, because He can resolve it. We can turn to Him for guidance and answers in all those situations. So I've got a question here. How do couples draw near to Jesus? We know there's an importance for Christ to be in the center, but how do you do it as couples? So I just gave some examples. Seeking His will for your life together. Okay, you know that comes through prayer. Reading the Bible together. Discussing and studying the Bible together. You know, we've got times that we've got the School of Acts that we talk about Bible verses. We study those Bible verses. You can also do that at home. Study the Bible together. You share verses and revelations together. When God gives you something, share it with your partner. Praying together. Singing together. Thanking Him together. See, all this lays a very solid groundwork to focus on God in your marriage. Now, another point, of course, and you'll know this if you've been married a long time. Marriage requires a special intentionality, and I'll discuss that word, to keep it from drifting on the rock. You've got to be intentional at what you do. What intentionality means is deliberately make ourselves do things. Right? So there's an action that we have to either stop from doing, if it's going to be a negative action, if it's an anger resulting from anger, which goes into sin, or if it's a thing that we do it for good. You know, my wife says, I'm going to do this, or the husband says, I'm going to do that for my wife. That sort of stuff. It's a deliberate thing. It doesn't just happen. So, a couple of examples I'm giving on this one for the intentionality, right? Forgiving quickly. When something happens, a lot of people hold on to it. As Christians, you shouldn't. You should forgive straight away. Straight away. You should actually, you know, there's a verse that I think it's in Romans, that Paul talks about give room for one another. What's that room mean? The room means expect that sometime, somehow, you're going to be offended from either your brothers or sisters, from your children, from your parents, from your partner. So forgive quickly. Not controlling your partner, right? Not controlling your partner. Committing to your relationship with time together, with date nights and with intimacy. Showing honour and respect to your partner. Trusting your partner. Having regular and open communication, open and honest communication with your partner. Giving each other space when they need it. You know, having Jesus also at the centre, you know, during the conflict time, also means correction. Because Jesus is going to correct, not the husband, not the wife. He's going to correct either one or the other or both. Now, if one sways in the marriage relationship, both of you as a couple can turn together to see the Word of God first and then pray about it. So I've got 4 questions here to ask yourself before I move on to the second principle. Are you more committed to obeying Jesus than getting your own way? Do his words or our feelings consistently win the day? Are you ready to take the hard, costly steps he calls you to take again and again and again? Is your marriage, is your house built on a rock or on sand? These are questions for you to take home, for you to ponder now. The second principle I've got here is communication and active listening. Communication and active listening. It's a really good topic for me. So, I'll give you another story. A man goes to a doctor. He's concerned about his wife's hearing. So, the doctor says, what I want you to do is when you get home, stand behind her and say something, but don't be too close, right? Give a certain distance. And when she hears you, tell me what that distance is. So the man goes home, he sees his wife in the distance, and she's at the kitchen and she's cutting some carrots on the countertop. He's about 15 metres away. So he says, honey, what's for dinner? So he gets about halfway, about 7 metres away, and he repeats the same question, honey, what's for dinner? Now he's really concerned. He gets right behind her and he says, I'm going to ask this a third time in his head, right? He gets right behind her and he says, honey, what's for dinner? And she says, for the third time I've told you it's beef stew. Effective communication. It's a must for any successful marriage. And that doesn't mean just talking, it means active listening, understanding and empathizing with your spouse. If we go to 1 Peter 3:7, please. You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honour as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. I'd love to go on with that. Share her honour as fellow heir of the grace of life. That's just a wonderful thing that Peter's saying there. Proverbs 18:21. Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. I know you women, because of the women's conference, can ponder that one. And Proverbs 25 verse 11 first. Like apples of gold in settings of silver is a word spoken in right circumstances. And verse 15 of that same. By forbearance a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue breaks the bone. Notice the distinction here. A ruler, and normally with rulers they're like, you'll do what I say. And it says a soft tongue will break the bone. You know, a bone's supposed to be like rigid, not meant to be broken. But what's it say? A soft tongue. That'll break stubbornness. That'll break a strong will. See, it's not by matching them. Right? You've got one steam train coming this way, and you've got one steam train. What's going to happen is they crash. It's not going to work. What the Bible tells us, it's not by matching strength with strength. It's by being gentle in how you speak. So I've got just 2 things that you can think about here. For you ladies, if you want your man closer to you, what do you do? I'm talking in speech. What do you do? And for the men, if you want your ladies closer to you, what do you do? Harsh words won't work. Yeah, I'm talking more about communication, the way you speak. You can, yes. See, in marriage, for communication, I'm focusing on that in that context. There's always got to exist a safe place where you and your spouse, right, can both express your thoughts, your feelings, your concerns, and without fear or judgment. I mean, that's the whole thing when it says to become one flesh. You know, if I'm one and my flesh, and I've got injury here, and I'm one flesh. If she hurts, I hurt. If your spouse hurts, you should hurt. Shouldn't be a great feeling. But it should be a space that you have within your lives that you can share all of these things. In a Christian marriage, communication should always be rooted in love, respect, and honesty. And those things are characterized by kindness, patience, and understanding. Now, I know these words are just, some of them are hard because we're not naturally brought up that way. When we go in it from our single lives, I'm independent and this and that, and I, come into a marriage, things change. But it's important to understand this is where God wants us to be in a marriage. So by actively listening to your spouse, you demonstrate that their thoughts and feelings matter to you. And what does effective communication do? It resolves disagreements, it builds trust, it strengthens and bonds the relationship between husband and wife, all through communication. So that leads me to my next principle. I call this trust and honesty. Trust and honesty. So, there's one man who's married for 67 years. So he's on a show, and the television presenter that's interviewing him says, "So, what's the secret for being married that long? 67 years is a long time." He says, "Well, in all of these years, twice a week without fail, we went out dining and dancing. I went on Monday and Wednesday, and she went on Tuesday and Thursday." So the verse for this principle, Matthew 5:8, please. "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." This is all about trust and honesty. Blessed are the pure in heart. That's the foundation that's a foundation principle of any marriage, trust and honesty. It's the bedrock upon which a strong relationship is built. See, what I learned early on in my marriage, because it's a foundational principle, your spouse is not meant to be your enemy in marriage. She's not your enemy, and he's not your enemy. Your spouse is meant to have your best interests at heart. That's why sometimes it causes conflict. Honesty, on the other hand, it's the cornerstone of trust. See, we're meant to be willing, you're meant to be willing, to be open and transparent and vulnerable with your spouse. A lot of people fear that. Oh, what if I open up too much? Maybe she'll think this, or maybe he'll think this. But you're meant to be vulnerable with your spouse, because you're not marrying you're marrying someone that becomes your flesh. You're meant to be truthful even when it's difficult. See, in a Christian marriage, trust and honesty, they go hand in hand with faith in God. And God is faithful. So we trust in His faithfulness. By trusting in God's faithfulness and being honest with each other, we create a safe and secure environment where our love of the couple can flourish and the marriage can thrive. So, if we talk about a little bit about God's faithfulness, why do we trust in God's faithfulness in our marriage? Why? Someone can answer? Why do we trust in His faithfulness for our marriage? Not in our faithfulness, His faithfulness in our marriage. Because He says He's always faithful. Is God faithful? Yes. Did God bring you two together? I want to hear this, the answer to this one. Did God bring you two together, brother? Yes. Did God bring you two together? Yes. Bro, did God bring you two together? Yes. Did God bring you two together? Brother Vitch, did God bring you two together? Yes. And yes, God brought us two together.
The answer for you.
I was married once. God did bring us together.
Yes. Thank you, sister. You know, in the Bible it says, what I have brought together. If you're thinking something different here, you've got to be realigned. Right? Oh, but it was my will, my free will to choose this partner and stuff like that. It says, when God brings together, no man can separate. That's what God says. He's not wrong. So, where's the understanding that's missing here? So, I'll lead on to the next topic. This one's called fidelity. So, a man and woman, they're in bed together. When suddenly there's a noise in the house, the woman rolls over and says, "It's my husband, you have to leave." The man, he jumps out of bed, jumps through the window, crawls through the bushes, and ends up out on the street. Then he realizes something. He goes back to the house and says to the woman, "Wait, I'm your husband." She replies with a nasty look, "So why did you run?" So when Jesus spoke on the Sermon on the Mount about marriage specifically, he said this in Matthew 5:27-28. "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So what's Jesus saying here is very simple. He says, don't just avoid the forbidden woman's bed or the forbidden man's bed in a female context. Avoid even imagining yourself in their bed. You know, that is for both men and women. Avoid even imagining yourself in their bed. That's a high bar, isn't it? Jesus is telling us, this is one way to look at it, go to whatever lengths necessary to avoid it, to completely guard your purity and your intimacy with your partner. Completely guard against it. Now, in our day and age, I know that's difficult, but what he's saying here is you belong to your partner. You belong to your partner only. See, Jesus follows that with verse 29. This is how strong Jesus puts it. If we go to Matthew 5, verse 29, if your right eye, now of course this is kind of symbolic, it's not saying actually do it. Now if your right eye is causing you to sin, tear it out and throw it away from you, for it is better for you to lose one of the parts of your body than your whole body to be thrown in hell. See, he's saying here that if there's any cause, do what you can to get rid of it. Do what you can to get rid of it. I mean, sometimes you'll need the Holy Spirit's intervention. Well, I'm not going to cover that part. But here, what is obvious, this is what I want to try and make a clear point. Jesus on purpose sets the bar high for our purity in marriage. That means he takes it critically serious to protect ourselves. Right? He's giving these things to say, don't avoid, not just don't do it, avoid it completely from your life. Scrap it, get rid of it. You don't need it in your marriage, and there's going to be so much benefit for you doing that. You know, what I notice a lot, I mean, it's difficult to do anything about it, but what I notice a lot, because, you know, with our kids and with our family and things like that, you know, they love to go out, watch movies and things like that, but I don't know if you notice this with movies. You know, anyway, it just happened the other day, like, watching this thing, and you know, they just, oh, hi, how you doing? Hi. They start liking each other, and the next scene they're in bed. Wow. They're sleeping together. The next scene. Is that godly? See, that's the corrupt world, right? And we all, I'm not going to go into the reasons for that because that's the way Hollywood tries to drive the culture, but it's a corrupt world. What those types of movies do when they introduce, those F words, when they put the F word between our Holy Father's name, the Son's name, that sort of stuff, it tries to brainwash people into thinking normality. This is normal. This is how normal life is, that the world sees it that way. I don't know if you notice other things about movies, even the kids' ones. When I used to watch a lot of kids' ones with my kids, I love dogs and the stories of dogs and, these types of things, the stories of families. But even in those ones, even the Christian ones, there's a lot of single parents with kids. And they have to stick a gay couple in there, right? There's parents with broken relationships, couples with broken relationships, couples with infidelity problems while they're married. And this, of course, goes in, I don't need to talk about pornography. Pornography is obvious where that leads you. Right? None of that is godly living. None of it. Don't be fooled. Don't be brainwashed. God is clear about it. Sexual intimacy, having sex with someone, is meant to be in the confines of marriage only, not outside. Do you agree? What do you think happens when we don't live the way God intended? I started the sermon talking about society, right? You find when societies live biblically, even if they don't believe in God, when they live on biblical principles, they thrive. Governments thrive, the industry thrives, commercialism thrives, capitalism thrives, everything thrives, people get helped. Everyone lives a better life. That's just living on godly principles. Forget about living under God. When we do live under God, of course, He has abundant blessing for the country, for the city, for the state. When we live the way God intended us to live in our marriages, we see abundant blessing. So the pursuit, this just raises the next point for me. The pursuit of purity also requires a commitment to never leave. Never leave. I've brought a couple of jokes there with 67 years and a couple of other things like that. It doesn't mean I'll leave in year 5, doesn't mean I'll leave in year 7, doesn't mean I'll leave in year 57. It means a commitment to never leave. Matthew 5, verse 32. Please. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife except for the reason of sexual immorality makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Why does Jesus say that? Why does He say that? He wants us to stay together. Do whatever we can to stay together. He wants us, because there's going to be problems, He wants us to reconcile. Fix the problems before they become major problems. Fix them. Matthew 9, verse 6, please. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. No, that's not the one. Matthew 9, verse 6, is that right? Yeah. Okay, I got it wrong here. Basically, it's what Jesus is saying. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, no person is to separate. And that's the point I made earlier. That's the key phrase there. What God has joined together. Now, I learned this a long time ago when I was born again, and I studied this verse. What this means when you're married. You make your vows to your partner, right? She's there, the man's there, they make the vows to each other. But you notice, it says here what God has joined together. God is a witness, right? You make a covenant relationship. Forget about the contract in New South Wales or Australia. You make a covenant relationship before God. That covenant relationship is with your wife, it's with her husband, and it's with God. And God never breaks covenants. You make a covenant with God. This is why He says, I hate divorce. Because you're breaking a covenant with Him. This is why He says, when this happens, you're committing adultery. You're making her commit adultery. If he joined you two together, then he was an active participant in your union, in your marriage, and guess what? In your vows to one another. When you promised her something and she promised you something. He was there. He witnessed it. So I'm going to lead on to talk about this topic is, this principle of marriage is correction, respect and support. So a young husband, he says to his young bride, you know, now that we're married, I need to tell you something. I noticed you have a few faults and I'd like to point them out to you. She says, sure, that's a good idea. But remember, if it weren't for those faults, I could have picked a better husband. If we turn to Matthew 5:5, please. Matthew 5:5. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. The gentle. You know, other versions say meek, because there's, you know, so Jesus was meek. But the gentle, gentle at heart. See, there's various times in our marriage, in our marriages, when one partner will make mistakes. You know, we're human, we're not perfect. One partner will miss the mark. You know, there's things that before you're married, oh, those things that they're doing, they're cute. But then after marriage, man, they're so frustrating. Why do they keep doing it? See, marriage is meant to last a lifetime. During our time together, correction will need to be made. Right? That's just the way it is. So the question isn't, do I need to correct or not? It's how do I correct? How do I correct? So it's important to understand, I'm going to try to answer this one. Both partners in marriage should have honour and value for one another because they are both children of God. Honour and value. They are both equal heirs to his promises and inheritance in Jesus Christ. Both equal heirs. And I want to try and wake you up to this one. Respect in marriage is not earned. Respect in marriage is not earned. It is given freely and unconditionally. If we go to Ephesians 5, verse 33, please. Ephesians 5, verse 33. Got that verse wrong too. Okay. This is the verse. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Is there any condition there? Is there any like, my husband needs to earn my respect? I'll read it again. However, each one of you also must love his wife. He's talking to the man side here. Does she need to earn your love? Doesn't say she needs to earn your love. The man needs to love his wife as he loves himself, and the woman must respect her husband. He doesn't need to earn your respect. You just need to respect him. See, if you think there's something different there, then you need to adjust the way you're thinking, because that's what Jesus says. We need to align our minds and our thoughts with his mind and his thoughts. Now, there's a lot of benefit to realigning our thoughts to that, to what the Word of God says and not what our own flesh says. Because what I'm talking about here is a strong foundation for marriage. Strong. What's a strong foundation do for the married couple? It provides stability, security, and a sense of purpose for your marriage. What am I here for? What am I doing? It lays the groundwork for a relationship built on trust, love, commitment to God, and commitment to one another. See, I'll give you a look at the big picture. When a marriage is built on a strong foundation, on the Word of God, it becomes a testimony to God's faithfulness. Remember I brought up before his faithfulness in our marriage. It becomes a testimony to the world. This is a godly marriage. This is God's love and his faithfulness in the marriage. So in correction, when we're correcting our partners, this is something we need to remember. If we go to Matthew 7, verses 3 to 5, please. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? Out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your eye. Okay. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. What's that telling us? None of us are perfect. None of us are perfect. But how do we do the correction? Meekness. See, when Christ walked on this earth, he was meek. And we need to have that same meekness, especially in the husband and wife relationship. So when confronting one another for correction, it needs to be done with gentleness, humility, patience, and kindness. Gentleness, humility, patience, and kindness. Those aggressive, the way you speak. I used to always hear, like, it's not what you're saying, but the way you say it. Gentleness, humility, patience, and kindness. We need to be aware of our own failures, which is what this speck business is and the log business. We need to be aware of our own sins with the hope of change and growing together as a couple. These are important concepts. And the last principle for today, I wrote here, don't murder each other. Oh, murder. How am I going to murder my wife? See, an old couple, they're celebrating 75 years of marriage. So, at their massive party, one of the grandkids asks Grandma, what's the secret to such a long and happy marriage? Because I've never, ever seen you and Grandpa argue or disagree about anything. I've never seen it. And the grandma says this story she goes, when I first got married, it was our wedding day, and we were very poor. So we were heading to our honeymoon on our donkey and cart. She goes, we were about an hour into the journey when the donkey just laid down and wouldn't budge. My new husband at the time, he said to the donkey, that's one. After a few minutes, the donkey got up and started going again. After another little while, the donkey again sat down and wouldn't move. And my husband said, that's two. Again, eventually the donkey got up and we went on our way. Then eventually the donkey stopped and wouldn't go any further. And without a word, my husband got down, pulled out a gun and shot the donkey in the head and said, that's three. I was so shocked. I started screaming at my husband, what did you do that for? Are you crazy? That's terrible. My husband turned to me and said, that's one. That stopped any arguments in the marriage. 67 years. So, Matthew 5, verse 9, please. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Don't you love that verse? Blessed, this is where the whole principle comes from this verse. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Have you ever lived with an angry person? I want you to think of this. If we go to Matthew 5, verses 21 to 22, please. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders shall be subject to judgment. This is why it's titled this. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to the same judgment, right? Will be subject to judgment. So in other words, what's Jesus doing here? He's talking, of course, unrighteous anger. He's not talking about like righteous anger. He's talking unrighteous anger. In this verse, what Jesus is saying, he's taken that anger part and elevated it to murder. He's saying that we should see that unrighteous anger the same as we see murder. So as Christian couples, we're to guard our marriage bed from adultery, from pornography, and we're to guard it against our own anger. if an issue breaks out in your marriage, which it will, never leave it unaddressed. Never bury it under the carpet. Never leave it, oh, we'll talk about this tomorrow. We'll talk about it next week, because it only builds and builds and builds. Other things that happen become problems, and it builds onto those things. And that thing that sits at the bottom there, the unresolved problem, is never addressed. You need to address it. In Matthew 5, verses 23 to 24, please. This is why you've got to do it. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. See, every marriage is different. Like for some couples, they say, oh, I just need some time to cool off, which is fine. And then I'll seek reconciliation. That's the next important part. Not just I need time to cool off, leave me alone, and we never talk about it again. Then seek reconciliation. For other couples, they want reconciliation much sooner. Don't leave it for too long. In Ephesians 4, verse 26, please. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. So this is a beautiful verse, right? It's essentially saying, what Paul is saying to us, try and reconcile sooner rather than later. It doesn't mean exactly, literally, when the sun goes down. Oh, now I better talk to my spouse and fix it. No. What he's saying here is, don't let it drag and drag and drag. Don't let it drag. Don't let it drag. Reconcile sooner rather than later. So my questions to you are, do you lovingly correct each other with gentleness and meekness? Are you quick to admit when you're wrong, or to confess when you have failed? See, if you can't do that, there's pride involved there. Do you gladly forgive each other? Gladly forgive each other. I'm not just saying just forgive each other. Do you gladly forgive each other? See, couples who avoid reconciliation, they give up some of the most sweetest moments in marriage. And I won't go there. Sometimes when you reconcile, it's the best thing. And why don't you don't want it to simmer. You don't want it to boil. You don't want it to increase frustration, bitterness, criticism, unkindness during marriage because, I've just gotten home. Why is she like that? I've just gotten home. Why is he like that? See, all of those things, frustration, bitterness, criticism, unkindness, those things don't belong in marriage. And I'll end it there. There will be a part 2, of course. I was thinking I'll do this all as part 1, but it just goes on and on. So I hope that helped. Thank you, church.